know that you denounce things, you praise things, and I agree with you in many of the instances where you do. I'm just pointing out you don't have a foundation under that very nice house of yours.
You really do talk as if I advocate for evolution. I say I wish evolution was true. That it's not an opinion of mine or a conclusion of mine. It's a desire or a piece of propaganda on my part. Convinced as I am that all the evidence suggests the cosmos began with a Big Bang, the universe is expanding very fast, and the rate of expansion is increasing, and that the galaxy Andromeda is headed on a direct collision course with our own, so that we know we can watch it in the sky, we can watch it through a telescope, that the something we have now will very soon be nothing. I know that to be true. You say, well, then where does your morality come from? I say, wait a minute, first of all, is this true or is it not? What about the evidence? Now, just about the origin of our own tiny species, never mind the cosmos, all the evidence is, absolutely all of it, says that we are here because of the operations of random mutation and natural selection. There is no other satisfactory explanation for our presence here. You say, well, that just means we're animals. Well, what if it's true? What if it's true? What if all the evidence is in its favor? Then it's not my opinion. It's not my propaganda. I can't make myself believe something that's in direct contradiction to all the known facts.
Then you should embrace the consequences of what you affirm.
Well, do I not seem to do so?
No, because you can't account for morality. Given what you just described, you can't account for it, and
yes,
you persist in hanging on to it.
The need of our species for solidarity and for survival is a perfectly good explanation.
No, killing other races off is another way to survive.
Sure, well, that's often enjoined by, as you know, is enjoined in the Bible.
But,
the destruction of other races is necessary for the children of Israel to get to the stolen property that they've been awarded in Sinai.
So what problem do you have with that?
I object to being told that it's a moral preachment. That's all.
Basically,
I object to being told that it's God's will. I can see why one tribe of Bronze Age bandits might want to kill and take the property and the young ladies of another tribe. I can see that. But to invent a story that says God gave them permission to do it, I think is wicked. And stupid, too, actually. And aesthetically somehow not pleasing. Let me add. Now, where do aesthetics come from if we're just primates? I don't know exactly, but we have enough surplus in our cortexes to allow for art and music and indeed love. Just as well, I often think. But I don't regard it as a divine gift. And there's absolutely no evidence that it is.
Well, this back and forth has been very instructive. We have a lot of people wanting to ask questions. So questions now, and then we'll just have one answer, and then move on to the next question. But this has been very good. Emily?
My question is similar to what Mr. Wilson was just asking. It's for you, Mr. Hitchens. Assuming, as you've said, that evolution has created everything that is, and that random mutation and natural selection produce mixed results, competing instincts towards generosity and love as well as toward genocide and war and domination. And if you, as you don't know where aesthetics come from, you don't appear to want to be pinned down on where objective morality comes from.
No, objective morality is from human solidarity. The need for survival. We couldn't be having this conversation if we were not moral animals. We wouldn't have got this far. We wouldn't have evolved language.
Okay.
Or civilization. So, I know I've said this before.
Okay, given the fact of competing human solidarities, definitions of morality, why should anyone listen when you say such and such an action is wrong? A nation should follow such and such a course. What is your justification for persuading people to believe certain things?
Only slightly better than my saying they should listen to me because I'm doing God's will. Slightly but measurably superior to that. And less arrogant. Considerably less arrogant.
I want to point out that
and aesthetically more pleasing.
I want to point out just very quickly and hit it and run away. And that is the evolutionary advantage is not conferred simply by human solidarity. Evolutionary advantage is also conferred by destroying your enemies.
Absolutely.
Okay? Now, you can't have just emphasize the one. So genetic propagation, preserving your little corner of the gene pool is a tribal thing. You can't just assume that enemies will only be Martians or aliens. So this means that evolution means conflict within the human species.
Yes. Where does that come from, by the way? That's God's will as well.
No,
and
it's
evil is God's will too.
We're sinners.
Isn't that a little trite or tautologist?
Very true.
It would be, of course, it would have to be the case because we're all sinners.
Yes.
Because that's how we've been made by God. This isn't very much nutrition, I don't think. It's not very satisfying. It doesn't tell you very much. I mean, I know the devil was once in heaven as a co-ruler, and there was a falling out. But I've never thought that was a terrifically good explanation of the problem of evil either.
Okay. My question is for Mr. Hitchens. First of all, I'd like to thank both of you for showing up and doing this for us. I don't think anyone else has thanked you for that yet, so let me be the first to do so.
Please, it's my pleasure, but thank you.
You're welcome.
No, very decent of you.
My question is, if your view of morality is that it is innate within humans and is simply a natural process, a natural accumulation of events, then isn't your statement that genocide is wrong in the Old Testament and evil and utterly despicable, and yet you just told us that you would like to kill those who wish to kill you, who wish to, radical Muslims, radical Christians, whatever. My question is, couldn't morality, if morality is evolving, would you agree with that? That morality is evolving, that it is, since humans are evolving and morality is found within humans, then by essence morality would be evolving. Would you agree with that statement?
It's what Macaulay called the Whig interpretation of history, that there is an improvement over time in our compassion, that we include more and more people and award more and more rights. But yes, I can't say I don't believe that.
Okay. My question then is,
but there are some terrible backslidings. I mean,
Yeah.
fascism is much worse than anything that went before it, and many, many huge improvements occurred before that colossal reaction set in. So it's unwise to just accept the Whig interpretation that evolution is a fairly straight line.
Well, yes, of
Relatively
course.
straight.
I mean, evolution, obviously, you have some backsliding with it. That's pretty obvious from scientific
Our
theory.
brains are in fact getting bigger, but very slowly.
But I guess my question is then, would you support eugenics in order to continue the good health and prosperity of the human race? A thing that is generally looked down upon in today's society, but for the good of mankind, I mean, there's a reason babies with Down syndrome has declined precipitously, and that is because people don't want to have to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
So would it be acceptable to say, well, look, for the good of mankind, in order to survive, why don't we kill off X amount of people?
Well, fortunately, nature does most of that for us. I mean, most abortions take place spontaneously in the womb. Nature knows this one isn't going to work out. It's called miscarriage. It happens all the time. If we're adapted, as you know, our bodies are adapted to life on the African savanna. We're adapted to an environment that we've fled from. But if there'd been humans with 2 or 3 lolling-headed disabled babies on that savanna to take care of, they wouldn't have survived. Everyone would have been killed by the predators. So on the whole, nature takes care of this for us. I'm not in favor of exterminating the unfit. No, I hope I didn't say anything that would lead you to the contrary impression. And if you ask me, is that just because of some compassion that I couldn't explain the origin of, the answer is actually no. There would be a utilitarian, or not entirely, there would be a utilitarian explanation as well. As when we encounter a terrifying new disease like AIDS. You learn a great deal from combating it. You improve your game in medicine and research. If you treat every human being, however disabled mentally or physically they are, as if they're worth the full value, you gain experiences that are well worth having for the betterment of the species in general.
If I could just tack one thing on, just general observation. An atheistic process of evolution means that terms like backsliding is incoherent. Progress is incoherent. There's no such thing as progress. There's no such thing as backsliding. all you have is change. If there is no judgment, is no God, is no standard, is no righteousness, then my perennial question is, by what standard?
Only on the fantastic assumption that you can't have morality without religion. A case you haven't even advanced one argument for yet.
Morality is subject to evolution just like everything else is.
We're going to evolve to the next question.
Well, that's certainly true. Religion is subject to evolution as well. Most religions no longer believe half of what they used to preach. I would actually say that was progress.
All right, my question is for both gentlemen, and this is because I'm noting an area of ambiguity. So Mr. Wilson first. My question is, what is sin, and how are sin and God, how are they related in a metaphysical sense? And Mr. Hitchens, I'd love to hear you comment on it as well.
The Apostle John tells us that sin is lawlessness. The Westminster Catechism says that sin is any lack of conformity to the law of God. The law of God, in its turn, is simply an inscripturated summary of God's character, what God is like. So ultimately, I would say that sin is being unlike God in certain love, holiness, those sorts of things. So sin is lawlessness or not being like God or Christ.
Because I don't avoid all terms of that value judgment, doesn't mean that I embrace all of them either. I think sin is one you can probably do without. Wrongdoing I can understand. Evil, I've told you, I think is important because it's the surplus value, the cruelty and horror for its own sake. Self-endangering, self-destructive, suicidal as well as horrible, in other words. Crime, of course, can be understood. And to call something a crime is a pretty severe condemnation. The word sin, as you've just heard, is completely incoherent because it's failing to do God's will, which means you must know what God's will is, which by definition no primate can. And I'm afraid Douglas has yet again failed to inform us of how he knows something that we don't. By what right, quo warranto, by what right he says he knows what God's mind is. I'm going to have to repeat this question. And I can tell you that at the end of this session, the question will still be an open one.
I would also like to thank both of you gentlemen for coming. This has been wonderful.
It's a pleasure.
My question is for you, Mr. Hitchens. I was wondering, it's on a much less scholarly level, I guess, but in your personal life and the people that you've come across, and I'm sure you've debated some interesting people, and just, you know, in passing, we meet different people and get to understand different life experiences. What would your opinion be on someone who, or on a lot of people maybe, who have grown up and maybe not believed in any God or have been devout, you know, non-believers, if that makes sense, or believers in a different religion, and have come across the Bible or have in some fashion that is not necessarily being proselytized, as you talked about, or not necessarily growing up in a Christian home, they have decided to convert to Christianity, and in doing so have put themselves in a position where maybe their potential wealth gain or potential influence in society would be diminished, but they feel that the returns for that are greater on a higher level. I guess, how would you feel about that? And what would you do if a supernatural experience occurred to you? If you had said, you know what, God, if you would show up right now and do this, and he did it, I mean, how would you react to that? Would you commit yourself to an asylum, or would you just ask more questions?
Okay. To the hypothetical person or persons you mentioned, my answer would be I wish them all the best of luck. And if it works for them, I'm very happy for them. I just don't want them trying to teach that Bible in a school attended by my daughter, or to try and legislate from that book in the common law of the United States, or to try and have a supernatural intervention taught in science class. I won't have any of that. Aside from that, we can coexist. I make that demand of all religions, by the way. And incidentally, you'd have to grant it to all religions if you thought that someone's life could be improved by reading a holy book and that they'd then be less materialistic and nicer person and so on. Well then, you know, it's said, and I believe it may well be true, that Louis Farrakhan's racist crackpot cult organization gets young black men off drugs in jail. Maybe it does. by handing them the Wahhabi Quran. Well, what have you proved there? Nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. But as long as they don't try and hurt me with it, I'm fine. Now, as to the likelihood that I'd have a revelation, I keep being told that that's what I'm secretly looking for. That I couldn't be like this if I wasn't some kind of a seeker. It's very irritating, though. It's like being told, you may not believe in Jesus, but he believes in you. Fantastically annoying thing to have said.
I can assure you that he doesn't.
David Hume, I suppose you've all read David Hume on miracles. If you haven't, you must. It's the most elegant philosophizing on the question of miraculous apparition that has yet been. He says, if something appears to have happened that is not consistent with the laws of nature, the laws of nature have been suspended, there are two contingencies. Either that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor, or that you're under a misapprehension. Which is the likeliest? It's always likeliest that you're under a misapprehension. And if you're hearing about this from someone who claims to have seen it, and you weren't there getting it secondhand, the odds that it's a misapprehension is being spread are exponentially increased. So if I heard voices telling me to do something, and that this was on behalf of a deity, I would check myself in, of course. And I hope that you would if you saw someone in the street raving and saying, well, let's not say raving. That would be to prejudice it. But if someone came up to you and said, you know, I'm on a mission from God today, and I've got various things I've got to do, and I hope you'll help me do them, because God's will has to be done through me. Why is it that you edge away from people like that rather than towards them, if they're on the same bus as you? What saving instinct makes you say, I think I'm going to move to another seat now, rather than say, ooh, I wish you'd share? Why is that? You know very well why it is.
I'd like to tack on
people who say they're doing God's work are to be distrusted.
I'd like to tack on a quick agreement. I agree with Christopher that I don't believe that creationism has any place in public schools. I don't believe that prayer has any place in public schools. I don't believe that the teaching of one religion over another has any place in the public schools. But of course, that's because I don't believe that kids ought to be in public schools. I don't believe that I don't think lockers ought to be. I don't think textbooks ought to be.
This question is to Mr. Hitchens. Again and again throughout this debate, you said that morality is innate to mankind, and Pastor Wilson, I feel you've argued on his terms on that particular point. How would you respond to the argument that this innate morality is actually evidence of God? Because throughout no society have we really seen a lack of morality destroy the society. Every single person throughout really our history has had this morality. How would you respond to that? That this is an obvious evidence that God created this morality within us. It's not Christianity that has taught us these ethics. It's that when God created you, yourself, he built in this moral code. So that's how you would be.
Well, to that hypothesis, I would say that it was unfalsifiable. And as you should know, if a proposition can be described as unfalsifiable, it falls as, by definition, weak or unsustainable. I couldn't possibly disprove that, in other words. There would be no way of proving that that wasn't so, which means it's a hopeless proposition. It would also leave, but suppose it to be true, then you'd have to ask, well, which other authority is instilling us with the temptation, in some cases the need, to rape, steal, perjure, kill, and so forth? Is that coming from the same great imprinter or another one? Is there, in fact, spiritual warfare between demons and angels going on all around us that we can't quite see? That's also an unfalsifiable proposition. It could be true. There's just no evidence for it. And I must say, old-fashioned, call me if you will, that when there's no evidence for a proposition, my inclination is to doubt it. There, I've said it.
No,
Next.
This is a question for Mr. Wilson. Allow me to read a passage from the text. This is on page 17 in your introduction. You say, the issue of thanksgiving is really central to the whole debate about the existence of God. On the one hand, if there is no God, there is no need to thank anyone. We are here as a result of a long chain of impersonal processes grinding their way down to a brief moment in time. If there is a God, then every breath, every moment, every sight and sound is sheer, unadulterated gift. And as our mothers taught us, when someone gives you presents like this, the only appropriate response is to thank them. I am not thankful, and I think that you want to be thankful, and so you're inventing God as wish fulfillment. I'm taking here Mr. Hitchens' argument. Please respond to how your feeling thankful necessitates God. I think that you can very easily say that you're inventing a God because you want to feel thankful.
Yes. The counter argument to this would be that it's simply a particular manifestation of wish fulfillment, so that you would like there to be someone to thank, and so you do. The difficulty with that is when you look at the vast array of cool stuff that exists around us, there seems to me to be, as one scientist put it, it looks as though the universe is a put-up job. Everywhere you go, there's something really fantastic going on. And it's not as though there's just one or two things where if I find an object, a brightly colored rock in the forest, and if I'm an unbeliever and I'm walking along and I find a rock, and I don't know if I should thank it, I don't know if I should thank anyone for that one rock. But suppose it's 17 trillion beautiful things, glorious things. It begins to look like a divine conspiracy, and at a certain point, a refusal to give thanks looks like willful stubbornness. So I want to argue that in Romans 1, Paul says the fundamental problem that men have is they refuse to honor God as God and refuse to give him thanks. So I believe that thanksgiving is at the heart of our difficulty in seeing.
Okay, let's move. Another
Well,
question.
can I just say something
sure.
on this?
Go ahead.
Because it goes very strongly to my point about the totalitarian character of religion. What sort of person wants his subjects, who he created, he made, to reward him by incessantly, and remember it says everlastingly, evermore praising God and saying, holy, 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 and always thanking and never stopping. It seems a rather capricious and tyrannical demand, doesn't it, to you? Doesn't it to me? I used to wonder when I was a kid, they say, well, I could work out what hell might be like very easily, everyone can. Convincing accounts of heaven are harder to come by unless you look in the Quran. But the Christian ones seem to offer a life of everlasting praise. And I remember thinking, what would that be like? I mean, after the first week of saying thank you at the top of my voice, wouldn't the thing start to seem a little subject to diminishing returns? Possibly even for the person listening to them as well. We'd never want to hear anything else from me but that. That's all that's demanded of me. I've been to North Korea. I've seen a state where that's what people have to do. They have to worship and thank all day, all the time. Everything they get is from the infinite love and generosity of the dear leader and the great leader, who, by the way, are a father and son reincarnation, which make North Korea just one short of a trinity, in case that detail interests you at all. There is one reason I have in my own life to wish sometimes to say thank God, and in a sense to wish I could mean it. And the word for it is apotropaic. Apotropaic is the gesture you make to avoid hubris, in other words, so that if your book is a bestseller, you don't just say, hey, I must be a better writer than I thought. You want to be able to say, it's nice to think that not everything is done by hand. And so the idea of thanking is a good way of indulging the apotropaic, but don't go taking it too literally or condemning yourself to a life of groveling, an infinity of groveling, because that would be caving into the sadomasochistic totalitarian core of religious faith.
North Korea is an atheistic state, by the way.
No, it isn't. It's the most religious state on the planet.
Next question.
That's what I said.
Mr. Hitchens, I don't mean to be rude, but you seem to have this wide-eyed...
I have a very thick skin.
All right, excellent. You seem to have this wide-eyed, mystical view of human meta-solidarity as moral absolute, and I dare say the whirling dervishes would be proud. But why should this human meta-solidarity as moral absolute, why shouldn't I believe that there are, A, competing solidarities? Why can't I believe that? And B, why can't I believe that what you're doing is basically just a power play upon all of us? And that really, morality is simply your preference that you are commanding of all of us?
I have to say, it's not rude at all as phrased, but it was rude of you not to be paying attention earlier. And you didn't do yourself any favors either. I didn't say, look at how superbly moral we primates are. I said the morality we do have is innate in us and is a necessary condition for our survival as a species. I didn't say how wonderful it was. Nor do I say how wonderful it is that we're also programmed to rape, steal, cheat, and lie. And I don't blame any celestial deity for that either, because it's because we are animals, not sinners, animals, but poorly evolved primate species that these things are innate in us. It doesn't need to look for a supernatural explanation. How could I prove this wasn't all a power play on my part? I couldn't. What was your other question? There was a closing one.
Well, the other question was on competing solidarities.
Yeah,
You've talked about like
by all means
this
there are,
big
yeah.
solidarity that we
Sure.
have with each other. Why don't we just have competing solidarities?
Well, we do.
I mean, there's brotherhood amongst solidarity amongst thieves.
Surely. And among fascists, very much so. And in particular among communists. I mean, it's actually what they call it, brotherhood. I don't see how that represents any kind of challenge to anything I've said. And that our species is divided into subgroups and tribes. I don't think we are subdivided by race. I think we're all the same race, but there are different ethnicities and tribalisms, and certainly a very large number of solidarities. The attempt made by the Bible to define these is the most laughable one.
It's a challenge to your position. It's a
The
challenge.
sons of Ham and the sons of Noah and all the rest of it, and the belief held by many Christians for a very long time, and by some of the Mormon persuasion to this very day, that black people are a special creation, not quite human, and condemned to be that color from before they were born. None of this, as you'll see, means that religion can shed any light on this stuff at all.
It's a challenge.
All of these things can be discussed as if there was no supernatural dimension. And as problems, they remain exactly the way they would be if there was no supernatural dimension.
It's a challenge to your position, because if our values and our decisions and our code arises from our solidarity, if there are competing solidarities, you don't know what to do.
Last quick question.
Professor Hitchens.
It doesn't undermine my position at all if there's no instruction to what to do there. When human interests and human rights, interpretations of right collide, that doesn't condemn my position at all. It's what you would expect of an evolved primate species. It's Hegel's definition of tragedy as a conflict between two rights. These things will occur. You can't resolve them by referring them upward to a celestial totalitarianism. You will get no help from that quarter.
Professor Hitchens,
Sir.
if I could step into your car for a moment, would not extinction be a great mercy for the human race? As it would be an end to these meaningless chemical reactions that are as likely to cause pain as pleasure, that apparently aren't leading toward any great conclusion or justice or redemption. Why should I not undertake a campaign to exterminate the human race and call myself a liberator of the human race from the pain and suffering that has marked its progress through history?
Well, you're addressing your question to the wrong person. It's not I who looks forward to the end of the world and to the apocalypse and to the last days. It's not I who says that my belief can't wait for this to happen, that that'll be the happy day when the trumpet shall sound and we shall be changed. I don't look forward to that at all.
But why not?
Ask someone who believes any of this.
But I'm asking why not, since your world is without hope and
Because with the short life I have been given by evolution and natural selection, I'm not going to be pushed around by theocrats in the short time I do have.
So are you thankful to evolution and natural selection for the short time you've been given?
Yeah. I have been, here I am. There's no getting around it. I don't attribute my presence here, as some so arrogantly do, to a divine plan. I don't think I'm the object of a divine plan. Do I look to you as if I'm the object of a divine plan?
Absolutely.
Thought not. Whereas, but the explanation that I'm here because of the laws of operation of the laws of biology is perfectly satisfying to me, and it doesn't leave anything unexplained. It doesn't mean everything is explained, however. That would be reductionist. But I don't look forward. No, I don't look forward to the destruction of the world. I don't look forward to the end of the world at all. It's those who believe in divine creation and divine dispensation who look forward to that. And you should be asking them, and perhaps yourself, why that is. I do think religion does conceal a death wish, not very carefully either.
At the very least, the end of the world, on Christopher's terms, would mean the cessation of all pain. And there is something that you could look forward to in that.
Yeah, but when Buddhists and others say, if only I would join I'd cease to suffer from pain and struggle and anxiety. And so I say, I don't believe you could give that to me. I don't. But if you could, I wouldn't think it was worth the having. I like conflict. I like anxiety. I like struggle. I like combat. I like all these things. They make life worth living for me. I don't want there to be a permanent peace and tranquility and banality. I don't want it at all. Okay?
But that's
What
what,
is
you're
the
gonna,
Bu- by the way,
but that's what you're going to get.
By the way, what does the Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor?
What?
Make me one with everything.
What
No,
does,
wait,
what does the Buddhist say to the Christian?
No, wait,
I'm going to get in my karma and run over your
No,
dogma.
wait, the other shoe has to fall. So the hot dog vendor gives him a slathered dog with everything, and the Buddhist hands over $20, starts to munch, waits for a bit, catch up on his saffron robes. Nothing happens. And he says to the hot dog vendor, what about my change? And the vendor says, change comes only from within.
On that enlightening note, we must cease this struggle. Please join me in thanking both of our debaters.
Very generous. See, I told you how polite they were.